The palace sat like a jewel atop the cliff, gleaming under the pale morning sun, yet its walls held shadows deeper than any night. Within those walls, the queen ruled with elegance and caution, a monarch whose sharp mind and unwavering resolve were matched only by the weight of her secrets. Her children, though young, carried an air of unease about them, the kind that comes from seeing the world as a place of potential betrayal. No one had earned their trust, not the counselors who bowed so readily, not the generals whose armor gleamed, not even the family members whose blood ran through the same veins. The queen had always warned them. Trust is a luxury you cannot afford, she told them in the candlelit corridors of the palace, her voice steady yet tinged with an unspoken fear. The world outside these walls is full of smiles that hide knives. Remember, my children, no one comes without a cost. Guard your hearts, or you will find them broken before you even realize it. The children, 2 brothers and a sister, had taken these words to heart. They moved through the palace with cautious steps, eyes flicking to every shadow, ears tuned to every whisper. They watched the servants, not with curiosity but suspicion. Even the smallest gestures, a bow too deep, a glance too long, could be interpreted as deception. Their laughter had become rare, cautious, almost mechanical, as though joy itself might be a trap. Outside, the world continued as it always had, oblivious to the fortress of caution inside the palace. Diplomats arrived with gifts and empty promises, merchants begged for favors, and wandering bards sang of far-off lands. Yet none could pierce the invisible walls the queen's words had built around her children's hearts. The queen observed them carefully, noting how tightly they held themselves, how rarely they spoke unless necessary, and how they flinched at even the most innocent gesture from a stranger. It pained her to see it, yet she believed it necessary. It was during the mid-morning, when the sun had climbed high enough to spill golden light across the marble floors, that the first sign of something unusual appeared. The children were in the grand hall, the eldest practicing his speech for an upcoming council, the middle one tracing maps of distant territories, and the youngest sitting cross-legged near the throne, silently watching the tapestries. Their eyes were sharp, calculating, as though they could see through every stone and curtain of the palace. That's when he arrived. No fanfare, no announcement. Just a simple man in plain clothes, pushing a mop across the polished floors. His uniform was humble, stained and worn from long hours of work, but there was a steadiness in his movements, a calm that seemed almost foreign in a place so ruled by caution and ceremony. The children noticed him immediately, their curiosity piqued despite themselves. He carried no title, bore no insignia, and yet he moved with an air that suggested he belonged nowhere but right here. The eldest brother frowned, whispering to his sister, "Who is that?" "Just another servant," she replied, her voice barely audible, though her gaze remained fixed on the man as he swiped the mop with precise, rhythmic strokes. But the youngest, who rarely spoke and almost never laughed, tilted his head, studying the newcomer more closely. There was something in the way he moved, almost absent-minded yet deliberate, that made the boy's guarded heart skip a beat, a dangerous, unfamiliar flutter of curiosity. The queen entered the hall then, her presence commanding silence. She paused, her eyes scanning the children and then the man. A flicker of concern crossed her face, subtle but undeniable. She had seen countless strangers come and go, each one trying to charm or manipulate, yet she sensed that this man was different. Not because he posed a threat, but because he did not seem to understand the rules at all. And in a palace where rules were life itself, that could be dangerous, or miraculous. "My children," she said, her voice echoing softly through the hall, "remember what I have told you. Trust no one. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever, unless they prove themselves beyond all doubt. Guard your hearts. The world will test you, and not all who smile at you are friends." The children nodded, their expressions serious, though a tiny spark of something unspoken lingered in their eyes, a spark that would not be understood, not yet. They watched the janitor silently, their minds both wary and curious. And for the first time in many months, the palace, though still heavy with its usual caution, seemed to tremble slightly with the possibility of change. Unnoticed by most, the janitor continued his work, humming a low, cheerful tune under his breath. He seemed unaware of the eyes upon him, unbothered by the weight of suspicion pressing down from above. And yet, in his simple, unassuming presence, there was a strange promise, something that might, just might, break through the walls that even the queen's sternest warnings could not keep intact. The janitor moved through the palace as though it were his own domain, though no one had ever seen him before that morning. His mop scraped softly across the marble floors, leaving a faint trail of clean shimmer behind him, and the scent of wax and polish followed in his wake. To anyone else, he was nothing more than a quiet worker, blending into the background of the grand halls. But the queen's children saw differently. They saw a human who moved without the caution, the pretense, and the calculated carefulness that the palace demanded. From behind a heavy velvet curtain, the eldest prince leaned forward, resting his chin on his hands. His eyes narrowed as he studied the man. "He doesn't look like the others," he whispered. "He doesn't bow properly. He doesn't," he trailed off, unable to name exactly what made the janitor different. It was a subtle defiance, a refusal to perform, that puzzled him. The middle sibling, hunched over a map on a polished table, murmured, "He doesn't seem afraid." None of them ever moved through the halls without fear, without calculation. The youngest, sitting cross-legged and silently observing, tilted his head. He sensed something that the others did not yet understand, a quiet confidence, a calm that did not demand recognition but naturally drew attention. The janitor's eyes, though ordinary in color, seemed alive with an understanding of the world the children had forgotten existed, a world where mistakes could exist without punishment, where humor could be found in the smallest slips. The janitor hummed a tune under his breath, soft and steady. It was not a song the children had heard before, yet it carried a strange warmth. The queen's warning echoed in their minds, "Trust no one. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." And yet, they could not look away. Throughout the day, the janitor moved with quiet diligence, polishing the grand staircase, dusting the gilded frames of portraits that stared down like silent judges, and tidying the corridors that echoed with history. He spoke to no one, asked for nothing, and seemed content simply to be present in a place so hostile to the unfamiliar. The children continued to watch from their hiding spots, torn between caution and curiosity. At one point, the janitor stumbled. His foot caught on the edge of a rug, sending him flailing for a brief, chaotic moment. A vase wobbled precariously but did not fall. And then he laughed. Not a polite, quiet chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh that rolled through the hall and bounced off the walls. It was a sound completely foreign to the children, who had almost forgotten that laughter could exist in the palace without caution. The youngest prince gasped softly, placing a hand over his mouth to suppress a smile. The middle sibling's pen trembled in his hand as he tried to jot down notes on the map, and the eldest leaned forward, captivated, as though the sound of that laugh had pulled him from a trance. He isn't afraid of the palace," the eldest whispered. "He doesn't care about rules," the middle sibling said, a hint of admiration in his voice. The youngest simply watched, wide-eyed, sensing that this man, this ordinary human janitor, was something the queen's lessons had not prepared them for. By evening, the janitor had finished his work in the halls but lingered near the children's favorite observation spot. He hummed quietly, absent-mindedly twirling his mop like a staff. The children watched as he stopped suddenly, looked around, and then, with a shrug, began to clean the floor in an odd, almost playful rhythm. Each movement seemed intentional yet carefree, deliberate yet spontaneous. It was as though he had invented his own rules, rules that the palace's rigid order could not touch. The queen, ever vigilant, had begun her rounds, observing her children from afar. She noticed their eyes lingering longer than usual, their postures less rigid. A frown tugged at her lips. "Who is this man?" she asked quietly to herself. "And why do my children watch him as if he holds the world in his hands?" The janitor, for all his simplicity, was unknowingly rewriting the children's understanding of trust and fear. He did not demand respect, nor did he command attention. He simply existed, a steady, human presence unshaken by the weight of a palace built on suspicion. And in that quiet defiance, the children felt something dangerous and thrilling stir within them. The first spark of curiosity, of fascination, of a possibility they had been denied for so long. By the time the sun set behind the cliffs, painting the palace in shades of amber and gold, the children retreated to their rooms, each lost in thought. The eldest wondered if the janitor could truly be trusted. The middle one considered whether he had broken some unspoken rule merely by existing. The youngest, he simply smiled, a small, hesitant curve of lips, feeling something he had not felt in years, the faint, impossible pull of laughter waiting to be discovered. And none of them could know that tomorrow, the janitor would stumble again, this time in a way that would shake their hearts even more, drawing them closer to a joy they had been forbidden to know. The next morning, the palace was unusually quiet. Sunlight streamed through tall, arched windows, casting long golden lines across the polished marble floors. The children moved about their morning routines as usual, silent and careful, their movements precise, almost robotic. The queen's warning echoed in their minds, "Trust no one. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." Yet, a small part of each child's mind lingered on the janitor. He was already there when they entered the grand hall, sweeping in his familiar, unhurried rhythm. His mop traced arcs across the floor, glinting in the sunlight. He hummed softly, a tune that neither the children nor the palace staff had heard before. It was light, almost playful, and yet steady, a melody that seemed to defy the strict, silent order of the palace. The youngest child, the one who had been silently observing for weeks, leaned against a marble column, eyes fixed on the janitor. Today, something felt different. There was no sense of threat, no rigidness, only anticipation. And then it happened. The janitor's foot caught the edge of a rug, a common enough accident, but what followed was extraordinary. He stumbled forward, flailing his arms in an awkward, almost comical dance to regain balance. The mop went flying, spinning in the air before he caught it again. He could have scowled, could have muttered under his breath, could have rushed to hide the embarrassment. Instead, he laughed. It was not a polite, soft chuckle. It was loud, genuine, irrepressible. It echoed off the marble walls, filling the grand hall with a sound the children had not heard in months, perhaps years. It was chaotic, messy, human, and strangely beautiful. The youngest child gasped and pressed a hand to his mouth, trying to stifle a reaction, but the corners of his lips twitched upward. The middle sibling's pencil slipped from his fingers, rolling across the floor, forgotten, as he stared wide-eyed at the janitor. Even the eldest, who prided himself on composure, found his posture relaxing, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Did he just laugh? The eldest whispered, voice barely audible. Yes, the youngest replied softly, almost in awe. He isn't afraid. The middle sibling shook his head, disbelief mixing with intrigue. No one is supposed to laugh like that here. Not in the palace. Not us. Not ever. The janitor, oblivious to the attention he had drawn, straightened, brushing dust from his hands, and hummed the same tune under his breath. He glanced toward the children, just briefly, with a faint, curious smile. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a thread of connection, fragile yet undeniable. For the first time, the walls around their hearts, carefully built from fear and caution, wavered. The laughter had done something impossible. It invited them to participate in a world they had been forbidden to explore, a world where mistakes could exist without judgment, where humor could bloom amidst the weight of expectation. All day, the children watched him in secret. Every stumble, every clumsy movement, every small misstep brought a tiny ripple of amusement. The eldest prince found himself quietly chuckling as the janitor attempted to reach a high shelf with a broom that seemed far too short. The middle sibling stifled a laugh as the janitor knocked over a stack of books only to pick them up with exaggerated, dramatic flair. And the youngest, he laughed freely, a soft, airy sound that startled him as much as it did anyone who might have overheard it. By afternoon, the janitor had unknowingly become a magician of sorts, conjuring laughter where none had been allowed, breaking the unspoken rule of silence that had weighed on the children for so long. The palace, usually a place of rigid ceremony and careful observation, felt lighter somehow, though no one outside the children noticed. The queen, making her usual rounds, sensed a shift. She caught glimpses of them leaning forward, watching, and for the first time, she saw flickers of joy in their eyes. Her brow furrowed. This was dangerous. She knew that laughter, however innocent, could be the first step toward vulnerability, a crack in the armor that she had spent years forging around their hearts. Yet the children could not look away. Every stumble, every joke, every small, human gesture from the janitor tugged at something deep inside them. Something they thought they had lost forever, the possibility of trust, the curiosity to engage with the world beyond fear, the simple, human joy of laughter. As evening fell and shadows lengthened across the palace floors, the children returned to their rooms, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. The youngest, unable to contain himself, let out a soft giggle as he replayed the day in his mind. His different, he said quietly to himself, a strange warmth spreading in his chest. Different, repeated the middle sibling, nodding slowly. And maybe that's not a bad thing. The eldest remained silent, but even he could not ignore the truth forming in his mind. For the first time, they had seen a glimpse of something extraordinary, a human who could make them laugh as they had never laughed before. And none of them yet understood that this was only the beginning. The days that followed were unlike any the palace had seen in decades. The queen's children moved through their routines with the same precision and caution, yet a subtle shift had begun. They lingered in the halls, hidden behind curtains or behind carved pillars, waiting for the janitor to appear. It became a quiet game, a dangerous one, because if anyone, especially the queen, noticed, there would be consequences they could not yet imagine. The youngest child was the first to break a rule. One afternoon, When the hall was empty and the sunlight streaming through the windows created shifting patterns on the marble floors, he slipped quietly from his chambers. He crouched behind a large tapestry and watched the janitor sweep in the familiar rhythm. Today, he didn't just observe, he tiptoed closer, curiosity overcoming caution. "Why do you always seem so happy?" he whispered, unsure if the janitor would hear. The janitor froze for a moment, then chuckled softly, as if the question itself were amusing. "I don't know if I'm happy," he replied, voice gentle and honest. "I just try not to let the day pass without finding something to smile at." The child's eyes widened. No one in the palace had ever answered a question like that, not politely, not evasively, not with carefully measured words. The honesty was startling, almost frightening. And yet, it drew him in. Soon, the middle sibling joined him. He crouched nearby, pretending to study a book on the floor but secretly stealing glances at the janitor's every movement. "You're not afraid of the palace," he said quietly, more as a statement than a question. The janitor looked up and shrugged, a small, human gesture that seemed absurd in such a grand, intimidating place. "I suppose I have no reason to be," he replied simply. The eldest was slower to join. He watched from a distance, unsure whether this fascination was foolish or forbidden, yet he felt the pull nonetheless. He found himself chuckling quietly when the janitor tripped over a mop bucket and laughed at his own clumsiness. For the first time in months, he felt a strange warmth in his chest, a feeling he couldn't name but didn't want to ignore. By the fourth day, the children were actively seeking out the janitor. They would follow him silently, hiding behind pillars or tapestries, watching as he polished floors, tidied books, and hummed his strange tunes. Every stumble, every small mistake, every moment of self-deprecating humor drew them closer. They laughed quietly to themselves, careful to keep the sound muffled, but the laughter was there, a rebellious, dangerous kind of joy. The palace, however, was not blind. The queen noticed the change immediately. She saw the corners of their mouths twitch in secret smiles, the way their eyes lingered on a certain part of the hall longer than necessary. She recognized the pattern. Her children were breaking her rules, daring to trust someone they had no right to trust. A frown creased her face. She had warned them for years, drilled into them that the world was a dangerous place, that smiles could hide knives, and that trust was a luxury they could not afford. And yet, here they were, drawn to a human who should have been insignificant in the vast, ordered halls of her palace. That evening, the youngest child found himself speaking to the janitor more openly than ever. He asked about the simple things, the janitor's favorite work, the songs he hummed, the places he had seen. And the janitor responded with warmth and patience, never scolding, never questioning why the child dared speak to him, only listening and laughing when appropriate. The middle sibling soon joined in, asking questions of his own. The eldest, still cautious, observed in silence but allowed himself the occasional quiet smile. For the first time, the children felt a connection that did not carry threat or consequence, a connection built not on power or blood, but on laughter and honesty. Yet, every moment spent near the janitor carried a shadow of danger. If the queen discovered them, if she caught them breaking the rules, she would be furious. The children knew this. Each laugh, each step closer, was a rebellion. But for the first time in their lives, the thrill of joy outweighed the fear of punishment. And the janitor, unknowingly, had become the center of it all. He had not sought to charm or manipulate, he had only lived honestly, with humor and humility. And in doing so, he had cracked the armor of the queen's children, one small stumble and one shared laugh at a time. By nightfall, as they returned to their chambers, each child felt a mixture of excitement and guilt. They had broken the rules, but in doing so, they had discovered something extraordinary. The power of laughter, the beginning of trust, and the realization that even in a palace filled with suspicion, there could exist someone safe, someone human, someone who made them feel alive. Little did they know, the queen's awareness was only the beginning. The more they sought him out, the greater the risk, and the closer they came to a discovery that would shake the foundations of the palace itself. The next morning, the palace felt lighter, though the walls remained as grand and imposing as ever. The queen moved through the corridors with her usual grace, but there was a subtle tension in her steps. She had noticed her children's laughter. She had seen their eyes linger on someone other than themselves. She had heard the soft giggles echoing from behind tapestries and pillars. Something was changing in the palace, something she had long believed impossible. Her children were beginning to trust. The queen entered the grand hall, where the janitor was sweeping in his calm, steady rhythm, humming a tune that had become familiar to the children. The eldest prince froze for a moment, a blush rising to his cheeks. The middle sibling fidgeted with the edge of a rug, trying not to betray his presence. The youngest leaned against a column, wide-eyed, heart-pounding. They had never been caught, not yet, but now, the queen was here. She paused, her sharp gaze taking in the scene. And then she saw it, the children, flushed and alive, laughing quietly at something the janitor had done. The eldest's laughter was restrained but genuine, the middle siblings was cautious but delighted, the youngest was free, unburdened, almost glowing with joy. The queen's frown deepened at first, but then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, it softened. Her heart, long shielded by duty and fear, felt something strange stir within her. She had always feared for them, always believed that trust could only lead to pain. And yet, here they were, smiling, laughing, alive, in the presence of a human she had not expected them to notice. The janitor, unaware of the queen's scrutiny, stumbled slightly over a small rug and laughed, a sound pure and careless. The children erupted, their laughter blending with his in a symphony of joy that had not been heard in the palace for years. The queen stood still, watching, realizing that something miraculous had happened. "My children," she began, her voice soft, almost unsteady. You are laughing. I have warned you, and yet you laugh." The eldest prince stepped forward, uncertain but emboldened by the janitor's presence. "Mother, he makes us laugh. He doesn't ask anything of us. He just is." The queen's gaze shifted to the janitor, who gave a small, humble nod, continuing to sweep the floor without ceremony or pretense. He did not bow, he did not speak in careful courtly tones, he simply existed, a human being who had no need to prove himself. The queen felt something she had not expected, gratitude. This man had not come to teach, to manipulate, or to rule. He had come to live, and in living honestly and joyfully, he had done something impossible. He had earned the trust of her children, not through lessons or threats, but through laughter. The children stepped closer to the janitor, each one finding courage in his simple, human presence. The eldest reached out, tentatively, and touched his sleeve. The middle sibling smiled, no longer hiding behind caution. The youngest laughed again, a sound so free that it seemed to echo through every corner of the palace. The queen approached them slowly, her posture formal but her eyes softened. She knelt slightly, bringing herself to their level. "I see. I was wrong," she admitted quietly. "Perhaps trust can exist, even here. Perhaps it is earned not through fear or command, but through honesty and care." The janitor looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just lived each moment. Laughed when I could. That's all." The queen studied him for a long moment, then nodded. She realized that the palace, its rules, its caution, its walls, had been necessary to protect them, but protection alone could not teach them life. And now, through a human who asked for nothing and gave everything without force, her children had begun to experience what she had long denied them: joy, connection, and trust. From that day forward, the palace felt different. The halls were the same, grand and imposing, yet there was a new warmth lingering in the corners. The children sought the janitor out in secret and in open moments, laughing freely, asking questions, sharing stories. Their joy was contagious, spreading even to the queen herself, who occasionally caught herself smiling as she watched them. The janitor had not only cleaned the floors of the palace, but he had also cleaned the shadows from their hearts. He had proven, in the simplest of ways, that trust could be earned, even in a place built on suspicion, even in hearts long shielded from the world, and even in the lives of the queen's children, who had once believed they could trust no one. And so, the palace, once a fortress of fear and caution, became a home where laughter was allowed, joy was nurtured, and trust, fragile, delicate, but real, was finally possible. The queen smiled, quietly, to herself, knowing that in this human janitor, she had witnessed something extraordinary: the power of kindness, humility, and laughter to change hearts forever.